At the Big Mountain Haven, a nonprofit sanctuary nestled in the rugged Montana wilderness and run by the compassionate Gallagher family, injured and orphaned native wildlife find refuge. But among the eagles and bears resided a truly unique creature, Rafis, a magnificent fully grown bobcat with striking tufted ears and powerful limbs. Yet this wasn't your typical wild predator. Rafis, in a stunning display of domesticated comfort, had claimed their worn leather couch as his personal throne, often seen watching television with an adorably tilted head and greeting familiar visitors with an air of utter confidence. Rescued at a mere 8 months old, a scared and fragile orphan struggling for survival, Rafis had spent 3 years transforming into a nearly 30-pound apex predator who inexplicably considered the warmest spots in the Gallagher's living room his domain. He watched their television with an unnerving sense of ease, completely at home. But the tranquil existence of this extraordinary bobcat was about to be shattered. The arrival of a stern wildlife officer clipboard, clutched like a weapon, sent a ripple of unease through the haven. Her pronouncements, each word a potential death knell, echoed in the cozy cabin. It's unnatural, potentially dangerous. The air crackled with unspoken fear. Would Rafis, this creature who blurred the lines between wild and tame, be ripped from the only home he had ever truly known? This is the heart-wrenching story of a bobcat who defied expectations and the desperate fight to protect a bond that transcended the wild. Before we delve into this incredible tale, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of wildlife and the humans who dedicate their lives to them. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss a single update. The Montana morning dawned with a breathtaking chill, the frost painting the vast meadows surrounding the Big Mountain Haven like a canvas of glittering diamonds. Sarah Gallagher, a woman whose 58 years had etched the gentle map of the outdoors onto her weathered face, stepped onto the porch of their rustic log cabin. Steam curled from her coffee mug, a fleeting dance against the crisp autumn air as her gaze swept across the distant tree line where the sun was beginning its majestic ascent over the towering mountains. Her bright eyes, however, held a hint of the worry that had become a constant companion. Morning came quick today. Her husband Tom called from inside, his voice still strong at 62, carrying easily through the screen door. Tom, a former forest ranger of 3 decades, moved with the deliberate strength that years in the wilderness had forged. Together, they had poured their hearts and life savings into creating this sanctuary for the vulnerable creatures of their beloved Montana. It always does, Sarah replied, taking a final fortifying sip before heading back into the warmth of their cabin. Especially when you've got a bobcat who thinks he owns your living room. No. The interior of their home was a fascinating juxtaposition of rustic charm and the practical necessities of wildlife rehabilitation. Their personal furniture shared space with a meticulously built enclosure that seamlessly connected to a sprawling outdoor habitat, their home serving as a crucial transitional space for countless rescued animals. Veterinary supplies were neatly arranged on shelves, and educational materials lay stacked on a corner desk, Sarah's command center for managing the nonprofit's intricate administrative needs. Yet the undeniable focal point of the room was Rafis. The magnificent bobcat was currently sprawled with regal comfort on their worn leather couch, appearing as though it had been custom designed for his majestic naps. He's been waiting for you to go outside so he could claim your spot. Tom chuckled expertly, flipping a golden brown pancake on the cast iron griddle. I swear he understands the concept of a warm seat. Sarah smiled, a familiar warmth spreading through her chest as she set her mug on the counter and approached the couch. At nearly 30 pounds, with his distinctive tufted ears and the characteristic spotted tan coat of a North American bobcat, Rafis was the very embodiment of a wild predator. But instead of the expected growl or wary retreat, he simply offered a languid yawn, stretching his powerful limbs before blinking at her with sleepy indifference. "Good morning to you too, Your Majesty," she murmured softly, running a practiced hand along his velvety back. Rafis responded with a soft rumble, a sound somewhere between a purr and a chuff. A vocalization he reserved exclusively for the Gallaghers. 3 years prior, Rafis had been a mere shadow of his current magnificent self. A frightened, malnourished kitten, barely 8 months old, clinging precariously to life. Now he was the unofficial and utterly captivating mascot of the big mountain haven, nestled in the breathtaking foothills of northwestern Montana. While most of their rescues eventually returned to the wild Rafis was different. One of the permanent residents whose early trauma meant he would never possess the skills or instincts to survive independently. As Sarah gently scratched behind Rafis's ears, her mind drifted back to the fateful day that had irrevocably altered their lives. It had been an unusually brutal winter 3 years ago. February had unleashed record-breaking snowfall and temperatures that plummeted far below zero for weeks on end. Wildlife conservation officers had discovered the young Bobcat huddled beneath an abandoned hunting cabin, his tiny body ravaged by severe malnutrition and frostbite on one delicate paw. His mother was nowhere to be found, likely another tragic victim of the surge in illegal poaching that had plagued the region that season. When the officers contacted the big mountain haven, Sarah and Tom were already stretched to their limits, desperately trying to save 3 orphaned wolf pups whose pack had been decimated by the same merciless winter. Resources were dwindling, but turning away an animal in desperate need simply wasn't in their nature. "We'll make room," Sarah had declared into the phone, her voice firm, despite the worried glance Tom had shot her. Their small operation ran entirely on the unpredictable flow of donations, and their personal savings accumulated over decades of dedicated government service. Each new rescue meant more expenses, more relentless work, and the ever-present risk of heartbreaking loss. When the young Bobcat finally arrived, he was a pitiful sight. Little more than skin and bones draped in matted fur, his dull eyes devoid of the fierce wildness that should have burned within him. Tom had prepared a heated enclosure in their small medical treatment room, bracing himself for the typical defensive aggression of a wild predator. The hissing, the spitting, the desperate attempts to escape human contact. Instead, the kitten had been too weak to resist as their volunteer veterinarian, Dr. Elena Martinez, gently began her examination. "He's severely dehydrated," Elena had murmured, carefully checking the Bobcat's pale gums. "And there's a significant infection in that right front paw. He wouldn't have lasted another day out there." "What are his chances?" Tom had asked, his mind already calculating the added burden of antibiotics and specialized care. Elena had hesitated, her expression somber. 50-50 at best. But there's something else you should know. He's been handled by humans before. Sarah had frowned, a familiar knot of anger tightening in her stomach. "You think someone tried to keep him as a pet?" "It's becoming more common." Elena sighed, her voice laced with frustration. "People find orphaned wild animals and think they're doing good by raising them, but they don't know what they're doing. Then, when the cute kitten starts becoming a wild predator, they abandon them." She gently stroked the Bobcat's matted fur. "Based on how he's responding to handling, I'd say someone had him for at least a couple of months before turning him loose." The news had filled Sarah with a familiar wave of righteous anger. Her 2 decades working for the Forest Service had exposed her to countless examples of human ignorance and cruelty towards wildlife. "Let's give him a name." Tom had suggested, already reaching for the bottle of specialized formula they used for orphaned predators. Might as well make him feel welcome, for however long he's with us. About Sarah had studied the bobcat's small, fragile face, noting a distinctive dark rufous streak that marked his right cheek. Rufus, she decided the name, feeling instantly right. It suits him. Those first weeks had been a relentless roller coaster of hope and despair. Rufus required round-the-clock care with bottle feedings every 3 agonizing hours. The stubborn infection in his paw responded agonizingly slowly to antibiotics. And there were nights when Sarah and Tom took turns sitting vigil by his side, their hearts heavy with the fear that he wouldn't survive until morning. "I don't think he's going to pull through," Tom had whispered one particularly bleak night as Rufus lay limp and unresponsive on a heating pad in their small treatment room. But Sarah, the unwavering force in their 40 years together, had refused to surrender hope. "He just needs something to fight for." She had insisted, gently administering another crucial dose of medication. Sometimes they just need to know someone believes in them. Whether it was the medication, Sarah's unwavering determination, or some hidden spark of resilience within the tiny bobcat, Rufus had begun to improve the very next day. His tiny appetite returned, followed by a flicker of alertness, and finally the tentative emergence of the playful curiosity that marked juvenile predators learning the essential skills for survival. By spring, his physical recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The frostbitten paw had healed, though he would always carry a slight, endearing limp. His coat had grown in thick and glossy, a rich tapestry of spotted tan, and his once skeletal frame had developed the powerful muscles characteristic of his magnificent species. In appearance, he was becoming a breathtaking example of a North American bobcat. But something profound was different about Rufus. While Elena diligently worked to minimize human imprinting with their other rescues, it quickly became heartbreakingly apparent that Rufus's early misguided human interaction had permanently altered his relationship with his own kind. When they had cautiously attempted to introduce him to another rescued bobcat, a female of similar age, who was successfully being rehabilitated for eventual release, Rufus had shown no interest whatsoever. Instead, he had repeatedly sought out human company, displaying none of the natural wariness that would be absolutely crucial for his survival in the wild. The agonizing decision to classify him as a permanent resident hadn't been made lightly. Sarah, Tom, and Elena had spent countless hours agonizing over his case, consulting with wildlife rehabilitation experts across the country, and even bringing in Dr. James Wilson, a specialist from the University of Montana's esteemed wildlife biology department. "He's what we call irrevocably imprinted," Dr. Wilson had explained after observing Rufus for several days, his expression grave. The critical period for learning natural bobcat behavior was disrupted by human contact. Releasing him would be a death sentence. He lacks the hunting skills, the natural caution around humans, and the territorial behaviors he needs to survive. Not to mention, he could potentially disrupt wild bobcat populations if he does manage to survive. Sarah had nodded, her heart heavy, but unsurprised by the confirmation of what they already knew in their hearts. "So he stays with us." "He stays," Dr. Wilson had agreed, but his voice held a note of caution. "But I have to warn you, keeping a wild predator, even an imprinted one, as essentially a pet, comes with challenges. Bobcats retain their instincts even when raised by humans. He'll become more territorial as he matures, may mark areas with scent, and could develop aggressive behaviors." None of those warnings had deterred the Gallaghers. By then, Rufus had already claimed a piece of their hearts, along with a coveted corner of their home. They had painstakingly constructed a specialized enclosure that seamlessly connected to their living area, giving him the freedom to move between a natural outdoor habitat and the comforting familiarity of their home. As federally licensed wildlife rehabilitators with decades of experience, they were uniquely qualified to provide Rafis with the specialized care he so desperately needed. What none of them could have predicted was Rafis's utterly peculiar and undeniably endearing fascination with their worn leather couch. "Earth to Sarah," Tom called, gently pulling her back to the present moment. "Pancakes are getting cold." Sarah blinked, realizing she had been lost in the labyrinth of memories, while still absently stroking Rafis's luxurious fur. The bobcat had drifted back to sleep beneath her hand, his powerful chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "Sorry." She smiled, giving Rafis a final affectionate pat before joining Tom at the cozy kitchen table. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Tom nodded his eyes, reflecting the shared journey. The big mountain haven had blossomed from a deeply personal dream into a respected and recognized wildlife rehabilitation center, now hosting educational tours and working closely with state and federal wildlife agencies. They had expanded from their original cabin to include several meticulously designed, specialized enclosures, a proper medical facility, and even modest accommodations for their small but fiercely dedicated team of volunteers. But through all the growth and change, Rafis had remained a constant, their first permanent resident and the unexpected, captivating face of their mission. "We've got the school group coming at 11. Tom reminded her, generously pouring maple syrup over his stack of pancakes. "Fifth graders from Whitefish Elementary. Think we should put Rafis in his outdoor enclosure for that?" Sarah asked, knowing how easily children could become overly excited around the animals. Tom considered this as he chewed thoughtfully. "Maybe. But remember how he completely won over that senator's aide last month. Having her see him lounging on the couch like a pampered house cat is what ultimately got us that extra funding consideration." Sarah smiled, the memory still vivid. The initially skeptical political aide had been utterly charmed by the sight of a full-grown bobcat watching a nature documentary with his head cocked in rapt attention. That single, unexpected image had done more for their fundraising efforts than any meticulously crafted presentation ever could. Their breakfast was interrupted by the familiar crunch of tires on gravel, signaling the arrival of their morning volunteer, Melissa, a bright and energetic young woman who helped with the daily feeding and care of the sanctuary's diverse residents. Currently, they house 2 majestic bald eagles undergoing rehabilitation after separate wing injuries. A wise-looking, one-eyed, great horned owl recovering from a collision, a mischievous family of raccoons who had lost their mother, and a playful black bear cub orphaned in the spring, each requiring specialized care meticulously designed to maintain their wild essence while supporting their delicate recovery. "I'll go help Melissa with the morning rounds," Tom said, rising from the table and carrying his empty plate to the sink. "You finish up that grant application." "Almost done." Sarah nodded her attention, already drifting back to the sleeping bobcat on the couch. "Just need to add the final budget numbers." Tom paused at the door, looking back at Rafis, still curled contentedly on their worn leather cushions. "You know," he mused, a hint of wonder in his voice, "for all the worrying Dr. Wilson did about him becoming aggressive as he matured, he's turned out to be the gentlest soul we've had here." Sarah followed his gaze, a familiar surge of protectiveness welling up within her. He just needed the right place to belong. As Tom headed out to greet their volunteer, Sarah moved to her desk and opened her laptop. The grant application for expanded educational programming stared back at her, demanding her attention. But her eyes kept straying to the peacefully slumbering bobcat. Rafis had become so much more than just a resident of their sanctuary. He was living, breathing proof of their core philosophy, that every animal deserved compassion, even those whose circumstances meant they could never return to the wild. The insistent ringing of her phone finally pulled her attention away from her furry muse. The caller ID displayed the familiar name of Montana Fish Wildlife and Parks, their primary partner agency for wildlife rescues. "Sarah Gallagher," she answered, already reaching for a notepad. "Sarah, it's Mark Davis," came the familiar, slightly strained voice of the regional wildlife manager. "We've got a situation I wanted to discuss with you before it goes any further." Something in his tone made Sarah sit up straighter, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "What kind of situation, Mark?" Mark hesitated, a beat of silence stretching between them. "There's been a complaint filed about your facility, specifically about Rafis." Sarah's breath hitched. "A complaint from whom?" "A new conservation officer," Mark explained, "transferred in from Wyoming last month. She visited your public tour last week and has concerns about Rafis's living arrangement. Says it's improper habituation and against rehabilitation best practices. But Rafis isn't being rehabilitated for release?" Sarah protested, her voice rising with a protective edge that made the Bobcat's ears twitch in his sleep. "He's a permanent resident because he can't survive in the wild. That's all documented in his case file." "I know that, Sarah," Mark said soothingly, his tone attempting to calm her rising panic. "But Officer Reynolds is pushing for a formal review. She's suggesting Rafis should be transferred to a more traditional wildlife facility where he would have less human contact." The very thought of Rafis being torn away from them sent a chilling wave of fear through Sarah. While she understood the theoretical arguments of many wildlife professionals, that even permanently captive animals should be kept as wild as possible, she knew with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul that such a drastic change would utterly devastate Rafis. His unique circumstances, the early and profound human imprinting, had created an animal that genuinely thrived on human interaction. "Mark, you've seen him yourself." Sarah pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "He seeks out human contact. Forcing him into isolation now would be cruel." "I agree with you, Sarah," Mark assured her, his voice firm with conviction. "But I wanted to give you a heads up. There's going to be an inspection next week. Officer Reynolds will be accompanied by Dr. Karen West from the State Veterinary Board. They'll evaluate all your residents, but I know the primary focus will be Rafis." After arranging the details of the impending inspection and thanking Mark for the crucial warning, Sarah hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of anxious thoughts. The big mountain haven operated with all the proper permits and meticulously followed approved protocols for wildlife rehabilitation. But Rafis's situation was undeniably unusual. Most facilities maintained far clearer boundaries between human caregivers and the animals, even those deemed permanent residents. The soft sound of movement drew her attention back to the couch. Rafis was now stretching languidly, his powerful limbs extending to their full length before he settled back into his usual comfortable sprawl, and one paw dangling casually over the edge of the cushion. There was something so utterly trusting in his posture, so completely at ease in his surroundings, that the thought of disrupting that profound trust made Sarah's chest ache with a fierce protectiveness. Tom returned from the morning feeding rounds to find Sarah still staring intently at Rafis, the grant application lying forgotten on her computer screen. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, recognizing the deep furrow of worry etched on her brow. As Sarah recounted Mark's grim news, Tom's face darkened with a familiar protective fury. "They can't just take him," he said, his voice low and firm. "We have all the proper permits." They could revoke those permits if they decide we're not following proper protocols. Sarah said quietly, the weight of the potential consequences pressing down on her. And technically, there are guidelines about minimizing habituation, even for permanent residents. But every animal is different, Sarah. Tom argued, his voice rising with passionate conviction. Rafis was humanized before he ever came to us. Forcing him into isolation now would be cruel, utterly cruel. Sarah nodded, her heart aching with the undeniable truth of his words. Reaching for her phone again, her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed a familiar number. "I'm calling Elena. We need to get ahead of this." Dr. Elena Martinez, their steadfast volunteer veterinarian, had been an integral part of the big mountain haven since its inception. Twice a week, she made the 40-minute drive from her small-town practice. Her expertise and unwavering compassion, a lifeline for the sanctuary's diverse inhabitants. As a board-certified wildlife veterinarian, her professional opinion carried significant weight with the state authorities. When Elena arrived later that afternoon, she found Sarah and Tom sitting on their porch, their heads bent together in a tense discussion, strategizing for the looming inspection. Rafis, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, had moved to his outdoor enclosure, where he was sprawled languidly on a large sun-warmed rock, soaking up the last golden rays of the autumn afternoon. "So let me get this straight," Elena said, her dark eyes flashing with indignation after hearing Sarah's worried explanation. "Some new officer thinks Rafis shouldn't be allowed on your couch." "Essentially." Sarah nodded, a wry smile touching her lips despite her anxiety. "She believes we're causing improper habituation." Elena snorted, a sound of utter disbelief. "Has she bothered to read his case file? The poor creature was already habituated before you two even found him. You saved his life. The inspection team will include Dr. West from the State Vet Board." Tom added, his voice heavy with concern. "We're more worried about her assessment." Elena's expression softened slightly. "Karen's fair. I've worked with her on several cases. She understands that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to wildlife rehabilitation. But," her voice trailed off her gaze, following Rafis as he lazily groomed his paw. "Will she understand, Rafis?" Sarah watched as the bobcat rolled onto his back, exposing his vulnerable belly to the warm sun. A posture of utter trust that wild bobcats rarely displayed. "Let me examine him today," Elena suggested, her voice firm with resolve. "I'll update his medical records with my latest observations on his physical and psychological well-being. Having fresh documentation about how he's thriving in this environment will help our case." As they watched Elena conduct her thorough examination of Rafis in his spacious outdoor enclosure, Tom wrapped a comforting arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Remember when we thought he wouldn't make it through that first night?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah leaned into her husband's embrace, the memory still sharp and painful. "And now we're fighting tooth and nail to keep him with us." "He belongs here, Sarah," Tom said simply, his conviction unwavering. Anyone who spends 5 minutes truly watching him would understand that. But as the day of the dreaded inspection drew nearer, Sarah's anxiety intensified. She had spent countless hours meticulously organizing their extensive records, preparing detailed documentation outlining Rafis's unique history and ongoing care, and even reaching out to Dr. Wilson at the university for a powerful supporting statement emphasizing the appropriateness of Rafis's unconventional living arrangement. The morning of the inspection dawned with an unsettling clarity, the air biting with a pre-winter chill. Sarah had barely slept, the weight of the impending judgment heavy on her heart. Even Tom's usually unshakable confidence seemed to have frayed slightly as they made final preparations, ensuring every corner of the sanctuary was immaculate and every animal was secure. They had made the difficult decision to keep Rafis in his outdoor enclosure, initially wanting the inspection team to first observe that he did indeed have ample and enriching space befitting a bobcat. Should we warn the volunteers not to mention his evening television habits? Tom asked, a hint of nervous humor in his voice as they did a final walkthrough of the facilities. Sarah shook her head resolutely. No, I don't want to be caught in a lie. Rafis is who he is, and we've never hidden how we care for him. We'll just have to make them understand the extraordinary circumstances. Officer Jeanette Reynolds arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, her presence radiating an air of professional severity. She was younger than Sarah had anticipated, perhaps in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, a formidable clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. Accompanying her was Dr. Karen West, a woman of obvious experience. Her silver-streaked hair and calm demeanor suggesting a long career navigating the complexities of veterinary medicine. Mrs. Gallagher. Officer Reynolds began formally, her voice crisp and businesslike. We're here to conduct a comprehensive inspection of your facility with particular attention to the rehabilitation protocols for permanent residents. Of course. Sarah replied, striving to keep her voice even and welcoming despite the tremor of apprehension that ran through her. We've prepared all our documentation for your review, and you're welcome to examine any aspect of our operation. The inspection commenced with a meticulous review of their permits and medical records. Dr. West asked insightful and detailed questions about their feeding protocols, enrichment activities, and veterinary care. To Sarah's immense relief, the seasoned veterinarian seemed genuinely impressed with the thoroughness of their record-keeping and the evident cleanliness and care of their facilities. Officer Reynolds, however, remained a stoic observer, her pen diligently scratching notes on her clipboard, her expression betraying nothing of her inner thoughts. When they finally reached Rafis's outdoor enclosure, Officer Reynolds's already stern frown deepened. The magnificent bobcat was perched regally on a high platform, watching their approach with an unnerving level of calm interest. A stark contrast to the wary skittishness a truly wild bobcat would typically display. As Sarah called his name softly, Rafis immediately stood, stretching languidly, before gracefully making his way down to the ground level of the enclosure. As you can see, Sarah explained, her voice laced with a hint of pride. Rafis has a naturalistic habitat with appropriate climbing structures, ample hiding places, and a variety of enrichment items. She gestured to the various features they had painstakingly designed specifically for him, including a small, trickling pond, sturdy logs for scratching, and platforms strategically placed at different heights to mimic his natural environment. Yet I understand he spends significant time inside your home. Officer Reynolds stated, her tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. She clearly considered this arrangement highly inappropriate. Rafis was severely imprinted on humans before he ever came to us. Tom interjected, his voice firm but respectful. Dr. Wilson from the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology Department determined that forcing him to live solely as a wild bobcat would actually be detrimental to his overall welfare. Dr. West, her gaze fixed on Rafis as he rubbed against the enclosure, fencing near Sarah, crouched down for a closer look. His physical condition appears excellent. She noted her professional eye, assessing his healthy coat, clear eyes, and impressive muscle tone. That's because he's happy. Sarah said simply, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. He has the best of both worlds. a natural space out here and the human connection he craves. Officer Reynolds made another deliberate note on her clipboard, her expression still unyielding. "I'd like to see the interior arrangement you've mentioned in your reports." Sarah exchanged a nervous glance with Tom before leading the inspection team back toward their cozy cabin. As they approached, Rafis followed along the length of his enclosure, his intelligent golden eyes clearly anticipating being allowed inside. "We have a specialized door system," Sarah explained, demonstrating the secure passage that connected Rafis's outdoor domain to a designated area within their home. "He can come in during supervised periods, but always has unrestricted access back to his outdoor enclosure." "And this is where the couch is located?" Officer Reynolds asked, her tone making the words sound almost accusatory. "Yes." Sarah admitted, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Rafis has shown a particular preference for our couch. It's become a significant part of his routine and comfort." The inspection team stepped inside their eyes, immediately drawn to the worn leather couch, the undeniable throne of their unusual resident. Sarah demonstrated how Rafis would be allowed in, and as if on cue, the magnificent Bobcat entered cautiously, his senses clearly heightened by the presence of strangers in his familiar space. But the ingrained comfort of his routine quickly overcame his wariness, and within moments, he had gracefully claimed his usual spot on the couch, tucking his paws neatly beneath him and watching the proceedings with an unnerving air of casual interest. Officer Reynolds' eyebrows shot up, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "This is exactly the type of inappropriate habituation I was concerned about," she stated, her voice sharp with conviction. "This animal is displaying behaviors entirely inconsistent with his species." "With all due respect, Officer Reynolds," Dr. West interjected calmly, her voice carrying the weight of her professional authority. "This animal's natural development was disrupted long before he arrived here. The Gallaghers have simply provided an environment that accommodates his unique and unfortunate needs. Our primary concern here is his overall welfare. Rafis thrives with this arrangement." Sarah added, her voice filled with heartfelt sincerity. "He's healthy, engaged, and shows absolutely no signs of stress. He's a wild animal being treated like a house cat." Officer Reynolds countered, her tone incredulous. "It's unnatural and potentially dangerous." Percalc, as if orchestrated by some unseen force, the cabin door swung open at that precise moment, and Melissa, their bright young volunteer, entered with a stack of educational materials for the afternoon tour. Seeing the unexpected gathering in the living room, she froze momentarily, a look of surprise on her face, before she quickly recovered her composure. "Sorry to interrupt," she began apologetically, but her words were cut short by a sudden blur of spotted fur. Rafis, in a swift and unexpected movement, had gracefully leapt from the couch and bounded across the room toward Melissa. Officer Reynolds gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, clearly anticipating a wild attack. But to everyone's astonishment, Rafis simply circled Melissa's legs once in a friendly greeting, before returning to his coveted spot on the couch, this time positioning himself to keep all the humans in his line of sight. "He always does that," Melissa explained with a warm smile, completely unfazed by the Bobcat's dramatic entrance. "It's like his way of saying hello to people he knows." Sarah could see Officer Reynolds diligently making more notes on her clipboard, her expression still unreadable, a mixture of shock and perhaps a flicker of reluctant curiosity in her eyes. The inspection continued for another tense hour, with Dr. West conducting a brief but thorough physical examination of Rafis, while Officer Reynolds meticulously documented every aspect of their unique setup. Finally, the two women stepped outside for a private consultation, and their hushed voices carrying faintly through the closed door. Through the window, Sarah could see them engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Dr. West, gesturing emphatically, while Officer Reynolds shook her head with apparent disagreement. "This doesn't look good," Tom murmured, standing beside Sarah at the window, his arm a comforting weight around her shoulders. When the inspection team finally returned, Officer Reynolds' expression remained stern and unyielding, but Dr. West offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Mrs. Gallagher, Mr. Gallagher, Dr. West," began her voice, calm and measured. "After a thorough review of your facility and a careful consideration of Rafis's unique circumstances, I've made my recommendation to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks." Sarah held her breath, feeling Tom's hand tighten reassuringly around hers. While Officer Reynolds has raised valid concerns regarding general habituation practices, Dr. West continued, her gaze steady and direct. "I believe Rafis represents a truly exceptional case. His physical and behavioral health appear excellent under your dedicated care, and the supporting documentation from Dr. Wilson and Dr. Martinez strongly supports the appropriateness of your approach for this particular animal." Officer Reynolds cleared her throat, her posture still rigid. "I still have reservations about the level of human interaction, particularly the unrestricted access to household furniture," she said stiffly. "However, Dr. West's professional assessment carries significant weight, and your documentation is indeed comprehensive. Our recommendation," Dr. West concluded, her tone leaving no room for argument, "will be to approve the continuation of your current practices for Rafis, with the strict condition that you meticulously document any and all changes in his behavior or health that might indicate stress or inappropriate development." A wave of profound relief washed over Sarah, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. "Of course," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "We already maintain detailed behavioral observation logs." Additionally, Officer Reynolds added, her stern demeanor softening ever so slightly, "We'd like you to consider implementing a more structured educational component around Rafis's case. If you're going to maintain an arrangement this unusual, it should serve a broader educational purpose about responsible wildlife management and the potential dangers of attempting to keep wild animals as pets." Tom nodded enthusiastically, his relief evident. "We've actually been working on a grant application for expanded educational programming. Rafis's story is incredibly powerful for teaching about the very dangers you mentioned." As they finalized the details of the inspection report, Sarah noticed that even Officer Reynolds' rigid demeanor had eased somewhat as she watched Rafis now dozing peacefully on his beloved couch, seemingly oblivious to the intense scrutiny he had just undergone. It was as if the entire inspection had been meticulously scheduled around his nap time. When the inspection team finally departed, promising to send their formal report within the week, Sarah and Tom stood on their porch, watching the government vehicle disappear down their long, winding driveway. "We did it," Tom said quietly, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. "No," Sarah corrected him gently, leaning her head against his strong shoulder, a profound sense of gratitude filling her heart. "Rafis did it, just by being himself." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the majestic mountains, painting the vast Montana sky in breathtaking hues of brilliant oranges and soft pinks, Sarah sat on the worn leather couch, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands. Rafis stretched out contentedly beside her, his heavy head resting gently against her leg, a low purr vibrating through his powerful body. Tom was across the cozy room, putting the final touches on their revised grant application, now incorporating specific educational components centered around Rafis's unique and compelling story. "You know," Sarah said softly, gently stroking the bobcat's velvety head. When we started this sanctuary, I never imagined our most powerful ambassador would be a bobcat who thinks he's part of the family. Tom looked up from his work, a warm smile gracing his weathered face. Home is where you're understood, Sarah. And Rafis understood that long before we fully did. As if acknowledging the profound truth of his words, Rafis stretched languidly and repositioned himself, pressing closer against Sarah's side, his purr deepening into a rumbling contentment. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distant wilderness, a wild bobcat might be beginning its nightly hunt. But here, in the warm, inviting light of the cabin, Rafis had found his place, not in the untamed wilderness of his birth, but on a worn leather couch beside the humans who had become his unlikely but fiercely devoted family. Sarah thought about all the animals they had lovingly rehabilitated and released back into the wild over the years, watching them disappear back into their natural habitats with a bittersweet mixture of pride and a pang of sadness. There was an undeniable beauty in that work, the triumphant moment of returning a healed eagle to the boundless sky, or releasing a recovered bear back into the vast, silent mountains. But there was another, equally profound kind of beauty in Rafis's story. The unexpected beauty of finding belonging in the most unlikely of circumstances. As the peaceful evening deepened, Sarah found herself pondering Officer Reynolds' initial firm objection that what they were doing was unnatural. Perhaps she reflected the clear-cut definitions of natural and unnatural weren't as rigid as many liked to believe. Nature itself was a tapestry of infinite variations, exceptions to every rule, and remarkable adaptations to every conceivable circumstance. Rafis's extraordinary ability to form deep and trusting bonds with humans might be unusual for a bobcat, but it was undeniably natural to him. The big mountain haven had been founded on the fundamental principle that every single animal deserved a chance, not just at mere survival, but at truly thriving. For the vast majority of their rescues, that meant a triumphant return to the wild. But for Rafis, thriving meant a worn leather couch, the comforting murmur of evening television, and the unwavering, unconditional love of two humans who had recognized that sometimes the most profound and enduring families transcended the arbitrary boundaries of species. And in that profound recognition, Sarah realized the truest gift. Not just for Rafis, but for every human heart that heard his extraordinary story and understood that compassion, in whatever unexpected form it took, was never ever wasted. Outside, the Montana night grew cold and still, the stars blazing with an almost fierce intensity in the vast darkness above the silent mountains. Inside the cozy cabin, Rafis dozed contentedly on his beloved couch, utterly safe in the profound knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. A valuable lesson. Rafis's story reminds us that compassion and understanding should extend beyond rigid definitions and preconceived notions. Every life has unique needs, and sometimes the most profound connections can blossom in the most unexpected of circumstances. Judging situations based solely on conventional wisdom can blind us to the individual needs and the extraordinary bonds that can form when we open our hearts and minds. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Rafis's incredible story. Please leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed this heartwarming tale, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of wildlife and the dedicated people who care for them. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you enjoy Rafis's story? Let us know your rating in the comments.